There's some weird psychological imbalance in humans that says, if it's on my calendar, I will do it. Right? Whereas if you give me a video, I get to them eventually, but they sit in my email box for a long time. Traveling is a hard way to reach a lot of people. Virtual facilitation is a good way to reach a lot of people and help them get better at what they do.
Welcome to Key Connections for Educators. I'm Nate Key.
And I'm Hannah Connect.
I got my start in corporate training.
And I started out as a classroom teacher.
But the conversations between us, they've made us better educators.
And now we're inviting you into those conversations because learning out loud together changes everything.
So whether you teach students or you train professionals, we believe these conversations can connect us all. Welcome back, everybody, to Key Connections for Educators. Probably a decade ago, virtual learning was sort of a new thing. And then come 5 years ago, in the middle of a pandemic, all of us had to pivot to doing something virtually. But now that we're coming out of it 5 years later, some people are still a little hesitant to do things virtually. Some people are hesitant to go back in person at all. So today, we want to talk a little bit about what it means to be a virtual facilitator, some of the really great things about virtual facilitation and some of the challenges. And I'm really excited today because one of my favorite colleagues in the world, Kirk Martin, he's with us today. We've worked together now for quite a while, and he is as expert of virtual facilitators I think you can get. He's got a lot of experience in both the classroom facilitation and virtually. And so I'm really excited to have you here today. Kirk, thank you so much for coming on the show with us today.
No, my pleasure. And if by expert you mean I've done it a whole bunch of times, it's like hitting your head with a hammer a whole bunch of times makes you an expert in hitting people's head with a hammer. That's my gig.
You've made all the mistakes, so we don't have to.
Made all the mistakes, yes.
Well, that's what our episode is about today, the pros and cons of virtual facilitation.
Kirk, before we jump into the topic, can you tell us a little bit about you and your history with training? And then also, why did you stick with it?
I was joked that I've done kind of the holy trinity in the financial world. I've done banking, insurance, and investing. And so I did a lot of sales in my early career. And I had a position with Smith Barney where I was a financial consultant, and I became the branch trainer. So whenever new software would roll out or a new process, I would train the team. And I started to have more fun in the training side than the selling side and working with clients. And so that kind of triggered that. And so my next opportunity was as a trainer. And if you've done training long enough, you get kind of bored with doing the same old thing the same old way. And so I went back into sales and was, I don't know about unhappy. You mentioned something earlier, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? That was kind of where I was at. And I actually had a career coach come in and help me because I didn't know where I was going to go next. And his big thing was, what are the parts of your current job that you like the most? And it was helping my employees be their best selves. That was the part I liked the most. He said, well, how much of that do you do? About 10% of my day is that. Well, are there jobs where 90% of your day is that? And that's a training job. And so it became pretty clear at that point. It's like, well, that's the part I like the most. I like seeing the aha in the face. I like helping people to improve, to be their best selves. That's fun. I enjoy it. And there is a part of sales in there. People always ask me, do you miss sales? Well, no, because most training is behavior change. Well, I'm not telling them anything brand new. All of sales was created by Aesop like 10,000 years ago. All I'm asking them to do is something they already know they should do. I'm trying to convince them to change. Well, that's a sales role, right? What are we doing with customers? We're convincing them to change from A to RB. Well, somebody in class is the same thing. So there's a bit of that in it. So you get that Jones gets itched a little bit with training as well. So if you like sales, you'd probably like training.
I love that you connect the two together. Yeah, sales and training, because so much of what we do as educators is motivate people to learn the new thing or implement the change or adapt to what is coming down the pike. So much of it is the motivation piece. And you're right, behavior change and being able to speak to that.
Somebody told me that The reason sales is hard is because effort and the benefit are separated by time. You don't see your benefit for a while. It's why losing weight or working out is hard too. If I eat a hamburger today, I don't weigh 7 pounds more tomorrow. And if I skip the hamburger, I don't weigh 7 pounds less tomorrow and I have a salad. But if I do that for a week, then I get to see change. But we're not wired that way. We're not wired to wait a week. And so if I make 100 phone calls today or I make 100 connections today, I don't see a tripling of sales tomorrow. And so I think that's part of the motivation is to do a thing that's hard and takes a long time to see the benefits.
Yeah, the incremental progress over time and inspiring our learners to stick with it and continue to put forth the effort each day to continue to progress through that change or through learning that process. I had a teacher once say, practice doesn't make perfect, practice makes progress. And I think for educators, that's a huge piece of what we're doing is motivating our learners to keep practicing to make that progress.
If you realize that, you realize training's not a one and done. And so many corporate organizations like send them to training so that they get fixed. And that's not really how it works. That's why we don't send people to 1 year of schooling and at age 5, they're done. No, it takes many years to learn all this stuff. And it's the same in any endeavor. But in training, sometimes we forget that there is a process and a progress that happens. They don't come into class at 9 o'clock and come out at 10 and they're 3 times better at whatever they weren't doing before.
Yeah.
They're a little better, maybe, hopefully, but you got to keep going.
Well, today, maybe we'll get a little better at virtual facilitation by talking together,
We'll make
right?
a little progress.
Who
Yes.
knows? Who knows? Maybe we'll make a little progress and maybe this conversation will inspire both us and our listeners to make that shift as well. So what are some of the things that like draw you to virtual facilitation and what are some of the things that yeah, make you a little cautious?
Well, I guess the first thing is, and I think most facilitators are like this, you enjoy the personal experience of getting in front of somebody. I like to see the aha moment. I like to see the body language and get that. But I don't always get that opportunity. I always joke that I like in-person training probably a little better than virtual facilitation, but they make you wear pants when you go in person and you can't just sit in your basement and wear a sweater and a pair of shorts underneath with too much information, but that's where we're going. I got slippers on right now. I don't have dress shoes. So there are some benefits for it. I probably make a bigger impact virtually because I can touch more people. In my role, I probably had 15 or 1800 learners last year. Well, I could never do that in person. I'd just constantly be on the road. And I've done that. And I think your facilitation skills start to suffer. 40 weeks of travel a year is hard on somebody. You're not your best. And there are more chances for something to go wrong when you're moving from one place to another. I used to talk a lot about people would say, oh, you get to travel for business. Like, well, it's not really get to. Like, I don't really have a choice. You have to because I like what I do, but I've had a lot of trouble convincing people to come to my house for training. And so somehow I have to reach the people. And traveling is a hard way to reach a lot of people. Virtual facilitation is a good way to reach a lot of people and help them get better at what they do. So there's a lot of things I like about it. It's a more controlled environment. And their expectations, we already talked a little bit about it in person, like they think they're fixed at the end. They don't want to spend a whole day sending somebody to training, but if they do, they want to double the impact tomorrow. And that's just not really how it works. Whereas virtual, it can be more of a process. Could we meet for an hour once a week for a whole year? Yeah. I can't do that in person ever. And so you can really structure the way it works. There's a setup challenge. I think you can't take your in-person PowerPoint and just throw it up on a screen and let's go. Hubba hubba. Let's do this thing. One, because no one will ever sit for a whole day and watch you on a webinar. It's just not how it works. But I can get somebody in a classroom and have a good day. They don't translate one to one in that regard. It's got to be set up from scratch. I see some car manufacturers, they take their gas car and they remove the engine and they put a battery in it and call it an EV, but it still has the hump where the transmission goes. There's no transmission. There's a trunk in the front, but there's no engine there because they've never re-engineered the thing. They just threw a different engine in the same chassis. And I think sometimes we do that with training is we take the same PowerPoint engine and we throw it in and it's that's you have to build from scratch. You have to say, well, what is my goal? What am I trying to do for this hour or 2 hours or one day or whatever? You have to do that in person, but somehow we miss it virtually sometimes. And you got to write it different. It's a different experience. You guys have seen it. How many PowerPoints do you see where it's the same as they did in person and they just throw it up on a screen and there's no adjustment to it? There's no, well, how do you get engagement virtually? Well, not the same way in person. I can look at someone and we touch eyes and it's like I'm asking them to give input or ask them a question. I can't do that virtually in the same way. So it's got to be done differently.
Let's talk a little bit about how we approach it differently, especially in the planning and the preparation stage. How do you shift your mindset and what do you do logistically to take that PowerPoint content and then adapt it to your virtual classroom?
So I really think it goes back to goal. What are you trying to do? What is the goal? Because the goal is going to be different for a 1 hour virtual class than it is in person class. So I start there, build backwards, start with the goal. At 10 o'clock, after 59 minutes of courseware, what do I want them to be able to know how to do, say, what knowledge do I want to fill their head? And so that dictates a lot of the build. As far as engagement, I do think virtual is interesting because what you establish early is what tends to stay. So one of the
Mm.
tricks is if you're going to ask people to engage with you, do it right at the start. Because if you wait 10 minutes or 20 minutes or whatever, they're doing the laundry, they're catching up on email, they're doing other things because you've established a pattern and it's harder to change that. And so if I'm going to ask them to chat in or give smiley faces or whatever my method of engagement is, I'm going to do it right from the beginning. I'm going to have a poll. I'm going to ask people, how's the weather wherever you are? Whatever my thing is, first slide's going to have that.
Mm.
Start early and keep it going often because once you acclimate, like, oh, I got to pay attention because this cat's going to ask me questions. So I think one of the things is get going early, find alternative ways because it does depend on your size. If you have 6 people in a virtual class, you can have virtual classrooms, you can engage with them individually. If you have 390 people, it's different. So you've got to adjust your tactics a little bit based on size of class and your goal.
I had an experience about a year ago where I was on a virtual classroom and the topic was neurodiversity. There were probably 500, 600 people on the chat. And I couldn't pay attention to the presentation because the chat was nonstop. And I still cannot tell you what was on the slides and what the presenter said, but I can tell you some of the debates and some of the things that were said inside that chat room. And I'm wondering if that's also part of this is making sure that you're scaling the right engagement for the right size of the audience.
Generally, chat is not a very efficient engagement mechanism because it's not time coded. You can't respond to a chat. And if you just get 50 chats all at the same time, you're answering one. Like when I answer a question in person, I look at someone, everyone else can hear the question. Everyone else hears my answer. Chat, they may or may not be reading their chat. They may or may not reference back to the question that was 50 questions ago, the one you're actually answering. So I can't stop the class and engage with someone in the same way. One of the best ways to, especially with a large audience, is use other methods. Like we use smiley faces and slow down or speed up, or a cup of coffee or sunglasses or whatever. You say, if we're going just right, give me a green check mark. If we're going too fast, give me a cup of coffee. It's a good way to get input. Does everybody understand that concept? Give me a green check mark if you understand. If you've got questions, raise your hand, kind of thing. And so you can use those tools, those emoji tools, to get some engagement. If you got 10,000 or if you got even a few hundred, it's a better way because you can see easily how the audience is generally feeling rather than trying to pick out one chat amongst what could be 100.
So true. Yes.
Use the use the technology too, the breakout rooms and the whiteboard and all of the pieces. Those are nice because they're not replicated as easily in person. So it's a tool you can use, but because it's not replicated, we don't use it as often if you come from an in-person background.
I'm still with you guys if you can hear me, but my network is struggling, but I can hear everything.
So true about the chat. You're right. Even when I have done smaller classes, I will often read out loud questions that are coming in the chat and then my answer just so that I'm making it accessible to everyone and they're being able to hear because you're exactly right. So much is missed if it just stays in the chat. And I love how you're using emojis and the creativity of the emojis to represent certain things so that you can get as many people participating and engaged with that in just a very simple way. That's really great and creative.
But again, it gets back to what's the goal?
Right.
I do a lot of continuing education classes, and the goal in a CE class is not necessarily knowledge transfer. It's a nice side benefit, but it's like, how do I get you the most CE hours with the least pain involved? Well, chat's not a very effective way to engage in that way. So you just figure out what works for your goal.
I think about the fact that there's a lot of people who might treat a virtual session as just a virtual lecture. And the question I've always had for myself and for those that are there is like, well, why bother even having a virtual session then? Isn't that just an asynchronous video that I'm just watching? Why am I not just posting that to YouTube and then watching it? Like this podcast, right? It's a great example. We're doing it live between the three of us, but we're not doing it with a live audience. We can post that later and you can watch it on your own time. So why is it that we feel like this need to put these virtual sessions together when sometimes they'd be better as a video?
You still get a lot of requests because thou shalt go through training because we're not getting the numbers or the result that I want. But I also think there's some weird psychological imbalance in humans that says, if it's on my calendar, I will do it. Right. So it carves time out. Whereas if you give me a video, I get to them eventually, but they sit in my email box for a long time. Whereas if it said, hey, it's only available from 10 to 11 on Friday the 16th, I would watch it 10 to 11, or I wouldn't, but I'm more likely to hit it if it's got a schedule attached to it. So you could make it a video, just only make it viewable from this time.
Sure, like a live stream of
Yeah.
pre-recorded content.
And I would wager to say you get better attendance.
Interesting. That's not a bad idea. And hypothetically, if you did it through a similar chassis, you could still have the opportunity to talk to people about their questions and answers if they had them, right? There's still some engagement that you could do there, but there's less on the facilitator to have to do things exactly right. Now, you do lose the spontaneity of somebody asking a question and then having that facilitator actually answer that question. But to your point, if that's not really the goal, is there a way to compromise that? Because we're already giving up the fact that we're not together. So there may be some compromise that we can do even on those situations.
I did one earlier in the year that was 595 people or something like that. There's not a lot of spontaneity that's going to happen there either. So what we did with that one is we just said, chat in your questions. We have no chance of getting to them all, but we're going to create an FAQ afterwards and email it to everybody who attended, where we took all the questions, grouped them together because a lot of them were the same question from a different perspective. And so we lumped them together and said, here's the answer. And that's how we interacted with people because we knew, let's stop and answer everybody's questions in 1 hour is hard to do and get any content out. We could have sat there and done 5 minutes of content and 55 minutes of questions really easily. So figure out the logistics of your whatever your audience size and your goals is what I come back to.
Yeah, that's a great idea to make it scalable. And even thinking through that ahead of time in our conversations with our partners so that their expectations are aligned with what we're actually able to deliver.
I think thinking about ahead of time is one of the biggest challenges for people because that's where your issues will show up. Nate and I have done this a bunch of times where you think about what are the possible challenges you're going to run into in this class and how do you mitigate those challenges? Well, my internet could go out. Well, how do you avoid that? Well, have a backup way to get connected. Have a little cell phone modem or your phone, set it up as a hotspot before you even start the training class so that if something were to happen and you start to pixelate like Nate is, you can switch to a different format. Or what if I have a co-facilitator that didn't make it on? Do I know the rest of the presentation? If I only know my half, it's not going to go very well. I had a class that I was doing for a large organization. We had a studio where we broadcast from. And I went in the studio, but we were getting hit with lightning that day, whole day, lightning strikes everywhere. I thought, you know what? We're going to lose power for sure as soon as I start my webinar. So I print out my deck so that I have all my notes. So if the computers go out, because our phones were backed up with a generator. So I know I was going to keep phones. And I had a co-facilitator in a different city. So she was not going to lose power. So as long as I could keep my speaking notes and keep going and wander along, I was good. So I took some preparations. I went into the studio. God love me, 3 minutes in, pow, out goes the power. One thing I did not realize is when the power goes, so do the lights. It's very hard to read your PowerPoint notes when you're in a dark room with no windows whatsoever. So you can't always get to every one, but the point is mitigate what you can. Why wouldn't I think the lights wouldn't go out when the power goes out? The computers would go out. I know that for sure, but somehow I thought the lights would. I don't know why. I didn't even think.
Kirk's there in a dark room with a cell
I'm in a
phone
dark
trying
room.
I
to,
was gonna say, use your flashlight on your cell phone, like
Well, the funny thing is the one piece of equipment that stays on is the laptops because they switch over to battery. And so I'm here with my PowerPoint trying to read my notes from the light from my laptop screen, is what I was trying to do, which is an inefficient way to read anything, let alone the notes from a PowerPoint. But at some point, I'm like, you know what? What slide are we on? We're on slide 18. What does that look like? What slide is that? Oh, we're talking about that. Okay. And I knew the presentation well enough where I could just speak somewhat extemporaneously. And that comes from practice. The first time you do it, you're probably not going to be as good. You're probably not going to be able to read from that. But what can you do to mitigate challenges that you might run into? Technology challenges are probably the big ones. What happens if the service you use goes out? We had WebEx have an outage one time when we were on a call. Well, we ran a list of everybody that signed up for the call and we emailed everybody and said, move into Teams in 7 minutes. And so we moved over, but we had a backup. We didn't know that was going to happen, but we knew if something weird happened, we could go here and we had something set up. So I think you can mitigate a lot of problems by just thinking about what are the challenges that you hit most frequently.
You mentioned having a producer in another city, and I know
Mhm.
that you and I and a few of our other colleagues in the past have had the opportunity to co-facilitate, which is a fantastic tip for anybody that's doing virtual because it not only gives you the backup, assuming you're not in the same exact dark room,
Yeah.
but it also gives you another voice and somebody who could potentially run interference. So what are some of the ways that you've used that secondary host or that producer role?
But I think it's different roles. Like a co-facilitator is someone sitting there with you telling the story, whether they're sitting there in the same room or not, but they're telling the story with you. Whereas a producer is keeping everything on track, the backroom wizard. So I do think they're a little bit different role. I would expect a lot more engagement from a co-facilitator. I think and you hit on some of these, the second voice, the second perspective. I think I'm pretty engaging, but some people don't. And so a different voice engages people, a different set of people. Greg Williams is who I'm thinking of. He and I are different people. And so a lot of people like his perspective better than mine, and some people like mine better than his. Well, let's throw both of them in there. And then you're going to find something you can take away from either one of us. So there's a lot of pros to co-facilitating. There's some cons. A lot of people that do virtual facilitation like to hear the sound of their own voice. They talk a lot. And you get two people like that, an hour presentation becomes a 2-hour presentation because you both give the hour. And so you got to trust the other person. I tend to be a little OCD. No, we need to slide 3. We got to be there by 12:38. And we're not there by 12:38. And I got to trust at some point he knows what he's doing and he's not going to take as much time later in the presentation, or we're going to make up for it in some way. But it's easy to cut each other off too. You got to know when he's really done and when I'm really done, because a lot of times you're done and then you think of something else and you cut the other person off. So I think it's an area where practice really makes perfect, where you've got to just work through. I know what his stories are now, and he knows my stories and where they're going and stuff. And a lot of times that second perspective helps you when you miss things. And so there's a lot of benefits to a co-facilitator. There's a lot of benefits to a producer too. What's the biggest problem? Well, inevitably someone is going to lose the link to get on the class. And they're going to send you an email 4 minutes into the class. How do I join? Are you really going to stop the class for everybody else and send an email to Joe because Joe lost your original email? That's a producer function. It is also one of those things where, knowing that, I normally keep the invite up on my email so that it doesn't take me any time to send it to him if I'm doing it by myself. Because I know that happens a lot. I don't have to go search through email and figure them out. So there are things you can do to mitigate some of the challenges. I think the other thing is there are no training emergencies. We are not performing brain surgery where if it goes poorly, the patient dies. If it goes poorly, we'll do another one next week. They can all join again. I would hate to waste somebody's 55 minutes or whatever, but it, don't put the pressure on yourself. It happens, goes bad. Relax, move forward. When you get agitated, so do they. So don't get agitated. It's just part of the process. Some days are not going to be as good as others, and your guest is not going to be as engaging. Your co-facilitator is not going to show up. You're going to have 3 people instead of 300. Those things happen. I had a class where I was interviewing an agent, and we had rehearsed it a whole bunch of times and we were ready. But at that point in time, this a few years ago, teams had a 250-person limit. And so before he had a chance to get on, we had reached our limit. So every time he tried to dial in, it would say, nope, it's full. Try again later. And then we tried having someone who was already on conference him in. But whenever they called his office would say, no, he's on a call. You can only do so much singing and dancing in the beginning. And then you start to see the numbers fall off. And they didn't get back in because everybody's leaving, which is not the right way. But the point is, you can't panic. Reschedule it or dance and sing until he gets on. Or, we were about 30 seconds from me just going, here's what he would answer. I know his part as well as I know my part. So we're just going to go with it until he gets on.
We're going to pretend. I'm going to pretend to be that agent.
Yeah, I'll change my voice or something. I don't know. I was just going to say, this is what Peter would say if he was on with us, but he's not. He couldn't make it for whatever reason. And it might have been Peter was sick that day. That was a technology challenge, but who knows? Do I reschedule? Do I give his presentation? What do I do? Do I do a different topic? So the more you can think about that sort of thing ahead of time, I think the better off you are. And then once the thing happens, don't sweat it. It has to happen 2 times before you realize that I didn't die. Nothing happened. I haven't lost a hand. There was no industrial accident that caused permanent damage. Just the training wasn't that great that day. Move on.
You've been doing this a while and thinking about good virtual facilitation versus great virtual facilitation. And I'm hearing some of that come out in this story: adaptability and flexibility, creativity and problem solving, and then also trusting the process and trusting your partner. What other things would you add to that list for trainers who are wanting to get better at this, particularly in the virtual space?
From an attribute, you have to have a sense of humor. You have to have some authenticity. You can't take yourself too seriously. We present a lot. And so just be who you are, whoever that is. If people find you interesting, that's who you want to be, whoever you are. As far as getting better, practice is the biggest thing. Just do it a lot. You get better. We talk about that in sales. Like when I'm helping people craft a phone call. Well, your 100th phone call is always going to be better than your first or your second or your third. And your 1,000th will be better than your 100th. You get better with repetition. As you said earlier, practice is progress, right? You're not going to get better just saying it twice. You might even get 50% better than the first time, but it's just progress. But there are places where TD has a virtual facilitation certificate. The emoji thing I learned from them. So There are ways to get better at that. There are classes you can take. I know I took a, uh, what was it? An improv class. It was in Chicago, Second City Improv. So they had a class for corporate facilitators because you do a certain amount of improv and it gives you a lot of confidence. One of the things that I remember from that class is that the audience is on your side. You're always going to have hecklers, and that happens. They do an exercise where you stand up there on stage, and the idea is that someone in the audience gives you a topic, and you have to talk on it as if you were an expert until someone gives you another topic. And it's a bunch of trainers. And so the first person is always like, oh, watch this. I'm going to stump him. And the first one they give you is like sewing machines. I'm not an expert on sewing machines. And I can only talk for so long before you start to run out of steam. But the audience feels you running out of steam and it's uncomfortable. And so someone throws a topic they think you'll know better because they want to save you. And if you've ever been in a training class, be it virtual or live, where somebody is sinking fast, it makes you cringe a little bit. You don't like it. You don't enjoy somebody dying a slow death up there on stage. And if you could help them, you would. Well, being up on stage, if you just know that they would help you if they could, makes it easier. They're not against you. You're not fighting 100 people in an auditorium. And so knowing that helps out. But you get that from practice and you get that, ironically, from training. Go to ATD, go to your internal training departments, whatever, however they do, but you can learn a lot of things.
Yes, so much of my good teaching ideas have come from being a student in someone else's classroom and almost stealing those ideas and adapting them for my audience, for my students. I have another question for you, and it's going back to the transition between being in person with your students and then being in the virtual space. I'm curious about some of the strategies you've used to be able to see if your learners are getting it. What are some of those measurement pieces that you have used in the past in a virtual space when you're not able to see the body language or the facial expressions or have that live discussion and hear them responding to questions in that setting?
Well, I think you use the tools to the best of your ability. Quizzes, polls, Q&A kind of things. If you can use those, that usually helps a little bit to figure out. And again, I rely on the audience a little bit and I'll use emojis like, did you get that concept? Give me a green check. I'm seeing one green check and a lot of blank space. Do we need to run over it again? So a lot of times I'll just use the audience and ask them, how are you feeling about this? Anytime in training you can get people as close to the thing you want them to do as you can, that's always the best option. If you're teaching them to do some kind of process, well, at the end, I'd want to see them do the process. Let's do the process. Let's do the thing if we can and make sure that you can do the thing. So the closer you can get to that, the better off you are.
Not just talking about the thing,
Right.
actually finding
Do
ways.
push the buttons,
Yes.
whatever that thing is. Yeah. Yeah. When we would do sales training, one of the big things, and this is back in the day when you did more calling, but we'd always say, okay, now it's time to put in practice. Write your script, say it to your neighbor, and then when you feel comfortable, you're going to say it to me. And everybody's going to shut up, turn around, and turn your back on me. I don't want to see your face because I can't see your face over the phone. So I can't see your body language. So I don't want to see your body language. I just want to hear it in your tone. I want to hear the smile or whatever. But get to the thing if you can. If you want them to be able to make a phone call, well, have them make a phone call. Don't talk about making a phone call. So the closer you can get to the actual activity, the better it is. If you want them to memorize some information, well, at the end, have them regurgitate the information. There's easy ways to do that. A test, a pre and post survey, whatever you want to do, but you got to test the knowledge. But I think that always goes back to the goal. What's the goal? How would I know they've reached the goal? That generates the class. That's the content. But how do I know they reached the goal is the test. That's the level 2 or whatever. That's where the rubber meets the road. Is that my goal is for them to be able to make a phone call, an outbound phone call that includes these 4 parameters. All right. So how do I know that they are able to do that? Well, I have them say it. Okay. Well, now I just teach them to that standard. It's teaching to the test.
One of the
Like
things that I love about virtual facilitation is that while I might not be able to do those things in the session itself the same way I could do it if I was live, like I could have you write down your answer, turn to a partner, go ahead and do that, and then maybe we'll hear from a couple of people, right? That's a typical classroom facilitation where we're face to face. Because it's virtual, we can still layer in some of those activities, but potentially it's, hey, today's session's ended. Your homework assignment is to make 3 phone calls. And then tomorrow you're going to do a self-evaluation before our second session. And then we're going to have a quick feedback mechanism or a conversation or fill in the blank, whatever it is that we can actually see and assess what the success rate was for that particular activity that we had. And you can't do that always when you're in person because the logistics and the expense of bringing everyone into one room, you don't want to let them go and then have to make them come back. So you try to create something where they can do that all self-contained in the same classroom where, because you can do it virtually, you could take 40 minutes today and then 30 minutes for a debrief next week. And that gives you that flexibility to actually have some applied practice in the middle of 2 sessions.
yeah. Well, and you're not the only person involved. There are other people that touch this employee or this person or whatever. So can you equip those other people to help you out? I know a lot of what I do, I'll write a manager's guide to this training class that goes out to their manager so that after they're done, here's what they learned. Here's how you might know they learned it. Here's how you might share that with the rest of your group.
Yep.
That manager's guide helps out because I can't really test them on a lot of things because I'm virtual. I don't see their body language. And if body language is part of what I want them to exhibit, but their manager can, they just don't know how.
Yeah.
Well, that's pretty easy. Here's the test. Go take the test with your manager.
And now we're
And
talking about
so,
scaling too, because you personally can't, even if you had the desire to, you can't actually meet with 350 people today to go do coaching with them on how they did with their sales skill. But if you have 350 people and they're working with their sales manager or a coach, that scale allows you now to touch that many more people through that training.
or maybe you have them partner up with each other and do it offsite.
Sure.
There are lots of different ways to do that, but just don't remember you're not the only one responsible for building up the skills of these 350 people. Somebody sent them to class for some reason. And so that person has a vested interest in this working. So enable that person to make good on that.
And ultimately, Hannah and I have talked about this before. It's that learner's responsibility ultimately at the end of the day, even whether it's a child in a K through 12 situation or it's an adult. Obviously, we put a little bit more guardrails around a child because they don't have the habit formed autonomy and good decision making to do it on their own. But we were talking about adults that are self-directed and self-motivated. They do want to do well in their career. And so they do have a vested interest. No one's going to want to do it better than they do.
I think the why should be part of the content.
Yeah, even with the younger generations joining the workforce right now, I think part of our job as trainers and educators is to motivate our students to put in the effort by explaining the why and having their buy in right from the start so that it's not all on us and we're working as a team, us with the learners. And I really like your follow up of partnering with managers after the fact, or Nate suggested the self-reflection idea so that it's ongoing and it's not just a one and done. It's how to bring what you learned and integrate it into your job function over long term.
I think it's fun too. Sometimes the easiest way to bring the why in is show them a train wreck,
Oh,
right? Like,
yeah.
and I did a lot of sales training. So it's easy to find terrible examples in movies or whatever, commercials of a bad salesperson. We don't want to be this person. Ned is from the movie that happens over and over again. What's that one? Groundhog Day. Ned's the life insurance salesperson in there, right? You don't want to be Ned. So I show a clip of Ned. Like, what did Ned do wrong? Okay, so we need to learn how to not be Ned. So that's one of the things that sometimes using a bad example is better than using a good example.
Yeah, because
You show somebody perfection and it's like, I can't ever be that.
mhm. Well, in human nature, I think people want to be critical, if you will. So enabling them to share what went wrong is a motivator in and of itself.
There's an entertainment value there.
Oh, good point. Yes, there
Right? So that's usually a fun way to like everybody laughs at Ned or whatever the thing is, but sometimes you can use a bad example and it's more powerful than a good example because some people can't aspire to be great. I could never be this guy, but I can avoid being this other guy that's really bad. And so that you can use that sometimes as your why.
was there ever a time where you did have a train wreck situation, and how did you recover from that?
Sure, I've told you a couple of them. When you're on and your guest star can't get on,
Right.
it's a train wreck. It's like you see the numbers and teams. It was like 251, 257, and then and then it's 254, 253, 247, 230. And as you watch the numbers, you're like, oh, that sucks. I'm watching everybody go away. So I've had those. I've had ones where just can't get on. It's my technology or whatever. That's where we developed. Okay, so what do you do if that ever happens again? So lots of train wrecks. Again, you survive the train wrecks. The one where I sat in a dark studio and tried to read my PowerPoint. It's hard. Like you go through those. You say things that don't resonate with the group so much, right?
I've done that before. Yes, yes.
Sometimes you got to go find a digital device, another device, and just log in because when the computer crashes,
Key word there. When the computer crashes.
for about 75% of this, I was looking at a blank screen, literally blank. It was white. I could hear both of you, but I couldn't see anybody. And so I knew it inevitably that this was going to happen, right? I just didn't know if it was going to happen before or after we ended. So I just tried to stare at the camera and smile and listen and look for the cues. And I knew that at some point in time, I'd have to probably log in on another device. And I did. And that's what we do.
Yeah.
You fake it as well as you can. You try not to let the anxiety in, and you know that it'll be okay because worst case scenario, you just go record it again later,
Take the stress off yourself. It's not the end of a lifetime. We don't have emergencies. We get to do over a lot. It's okay.
right?
Yeah, and the best educators I've seen, they remain calm because
Yeah.
that worry is so contagious. Our students can feel it, whether we're with adult learners or we're with younger students. And so the more calm we can be as we problem solve or talk our way through it with our students, that's the best thing because it keeps them calm. And obviously, people cannot learn if they are stressed or they're in fear. So, really taking it back, calming everyone down so that everyone's in an ease mindset to be able to learn. So many takeaways here. Is there anything you wanted to share before we close?
Well, I just reiterate, know what the goal of class is, practice, mitigate those issues that you can. And if you feel like you're not as good as you want to be at this, go take a class. We're talking about virtual training. So go take a virtual training class on how to virtually train. It will make you a better facilitator. And some of these classes are certificate based classes. So you can actually show your next employer, I am good at this. I do know what I'm doing. But virtual facilitation, it's here to stay. It saves so much money for the company. So if you're a stand and deliver trainer and that's all you do, I think you're looking at a shrinking market going forward.
Well, for those of you listening and watching, we would love to hear your takeaways. What stood out to you from Kirk's suggestions and the conversation that we just had that resonate with you that you can take back to your virtual classroom and be able to implement today to stay prepared and have your students engaged so that we can have the best training experiences in this online space as possible. Thanks so much for joining us.